Okay, what's the number one reason you should try Instacart? Shopping over 1.5 million unique products from over 1,000 retailers and get everything delivered right to your door in as fast as 1 hour, all in one app. So you can spend more time with the ones who matter most. Visit instacart.com to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. $10 minimum per order. Additional terms apply.
Imagine you're looking at a balancing scale with everything you do for other people on one side and everything you do for yourself on the other side. If it isn't balanced, maybe it's time to spend a little more time on you. And therapy is a great place to start. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist online who can help you find that balance and stick to it. Visit BetterHelp.com/positive to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/positive.
Jacob Albrocht, Tommy Castor. This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, welcome back. Sports Daily, hour number 2. Glad to have you here with us. It is an exciting time of year. We've got the NBA Finals, NBA Conference Finals, I should say, and a lot of news and notes to get through. We've been doing that in hour number 1. If you missed anything, you can go back and listen on the Odyssey app, where it streams every day. You can also go back and watch our video streams now, as you're watching some on Facebook, on YouTube, some on Twitter. Happy to have you on KFH both ways to take in the show for you, and it's been a lot of fun as we've made our way through this video stream adventure. All right, Tommy, so when Terry Nooner was hired at Wichita State to take over the women's basketball program, I think we all sort of identify the same thing, right? Like, we've got to get local talent. There's so much great girls basketball in this state at the high school level. Got to get some local flavor. The rosters the last 3 or 4 years have been so international based, which is really interesting and cool to get to know those players. But at the same time, it's a little easier, I think, to generate buzz and excitement when you know the players, and especially when you're trying to recapture some of that buzz and excitement. And so, that was something, and we're not the only ones. Nooner talked about that, at his introduction, and then went out and added Antoine Scales to his staff, who is a high school coaching legend here with one of the great dynasties of all time at Wichita South. It's like, okay, well, clearly we're not off there and we're on to something. What happens next? Well, yesterday they get their first signee to the new roster, and it's Treasure Jobe. And you might remember Treasure Jobe if you follow high school sports. She was an outstanding player at Wichita South for Antoine Scales. A little undersized, ended up going to Emporia State, and is a superstar, like a legend there. And if she played there this next year, probably would break a lot of records at Emporia State. Scored more than 20 points a game last year, and now comes in and joins Wichita State. Nooner said she's a dynamic playmaker, dynamic scorer, and he calls her one of the most sought-after transfers in the country. Now, that's interesting because if you look at lists, you're going to see Division I players. But we know in the transfer era that, players can jump levels, and if they're great players, they're great players. So that's a really interesting one. And I think this is exciting, one, because you've got somebody from Wichita coming back to Wichita State. Treasure Jobe, what an opportunity for her, who's had a great career at Emporia State, now comes back, reunites with Antoine Scales and then Terry Nooner. But this is what we want to see, right? These great local players that we feel like could absolutely succeed at the next level, get a collection of that kind of talent, and let's see what happens. Let's take our chances, because we see great players from this region go to other places and succeed all the time. And it's not just Wichita. It's around the area. Taylor Robertson of McPherson just became the greatest three-point shooter in women's college basketball history. Like, let's see if we can get players like that to stick around, right? And that's what's going to be fun to watch. There's all kinds of credibility, I think, on this staff that will help that happen. And this is an opening salvo, Tommy, I think that's exciting for everybody.
Yeah, that transfer makes a lot of sense, not only for the connection that you mentioned with Antoine Scales and all of that, but also the Emporia State connection, right? Brandon Schneider at KU coached at Emporia State. Terry Nooner coached under Brandon Schneider. So that connection makes some sense there. I don't know how strong the relationship, if
It's
any,
been
was
a long time
between
since he's
Nooner
been
and
there,
Treasure
though.
Joe. Right, but still, I mean, there is that Emporia State connection, right? And so I think that plus obviously her coming to play for Antoine Scales, who is now an assistant on Terry Nooner's staff, it makes a lot of sense. And so I'm with you. I mean, one of the biggest issues I would say with Shocker basketball, to an extent, both men's and women's, but I mean, primarily women's, is the fact that there's a lot of local talent that isn't sticking around historically in Wichita. And so if Nooner can prioritize that, I know that's a big deal for him. I think that there is enough talent in this market to be able to have, number one, familiarity with the players that are there and have the fan base get behind it. But number two, also, you've got really, really strong, talented kids staying in Wichita to have their basketball careers happen here. That's a big deal. It'd be one thing if the talent pool wasn't significantly deep in women's basketball and you're trying to get local names just for the name recognition, but they're really not contributing. There are really, really, really talented women's basketball players coming from Wichita. Getting them to stay here is paramount.
And we've seen on the men's side, right, some really gifted, and they didn't always start at Wichita State, but that have ended up there. Connor Frankamp jumps out to the forefront. Samaje Haynes-Jones, though, was a guy that stayed in Wichita. He went to Hutch for a little while. And
how about Xavier Bell on the roster right now,
Bell,
for Wichita State?
More recently is there. They had one of the Chapman brothers, Steele, was there for a little bit. So it's happened on the men's side, in a lot of the walk-ons and all these kinds of things, and that does add to it. On the women's side, I would make a case, Tommy, that the girls' basketball pool is deeper probably than the men's side. And this is interesting, and it's going to be interesting to watch this play out. I don't know if we'll be able to maintain the level of high level girls basketball players that have gone out in the last, 5-6 years. But even if it's a lesser version of that, it's going to be a talent pool. I mean, it is remarkable how many great players, not just good, but great players, have left this area for other places. We saw Ziana Walker come back to Kansas State. Man, that's awesome. That's fantastic news. We've seen, two of our greatest players in recent years, in Addie Brown and Emily Ryan, go to Iowa State. Like, why are they going to Iowa State? Like, how can we keep those kinds of players around here? And so I'm excited about it. I think there's an opportunity here to do something awesome, and I hope it just – here's what I hope more than anything, Tommy, because you mentioned – and walk down this path with me for just a second. You mentioned Brandon Schneider. So Brandon Schneider, while he was at Emporia State, coached against his dad, who was at West Texas A&M when I was there, and his other son was on the staff with him at You had this awesome family dynamic, and that was you talk about like packed arenas, and we're the big arenas. Like women's basketball, when you get a local and a hometown vibe to it, it can go nuts. And we're seeing nationally, just in general, the popularity explode because I think the exposure is getting so much higher. I think there's a real opportunity here for Wichita State to develop something and create another thing, much like they have with softball over the last 5-7 years, that people are really excited about. And man, in the wintertime, like, why not go to those games? If you've got a really good team, I think people are there. I think people are excited about it. It's this whole new opportunity. And they were messing around with the tournament and stuff not that long ago, and then they had all the controversy with with the coaching staff, and they had to pick up the pieces from that. But this is a chance to really capture something, and I hope that they do that.
So I've got a guy that works with me who is from Iowa, and he's a big Iowa Hawkeyes fan. And I think that, if you were to ask him, I mean, he's a fan of everything Iowa, but he was locked in more to Caitlin Clark and what the Iowa women's team was doing this year than probably the men's team. And of course, Caitlin Clark is a transcendent player, right? Like it's just, incredible what she does, but still like that appetite is there for a guy that, that I work with that is a diehard and always has been a diehard Iowa men's basketball fan. I think he was paying more attention to what the women's team was doing this year. So there certainly is an appetite, I think, for women's basketball. It's growing. It has been. I mean, look at how much, press and attention the women's title game got this year. I mean, it was huge. It was massive. So there is certainly that appetite is growing. It's growing year by year. And so if you can capture some of that at Wichita, and I'm not saying that there's a Caitlin Clark-like talent out there for Terry Nooner to get. What I'm saying is that overall, there is a bigger appetite for women's basketball right now than there used to be. And so there is a prime opportunity for Shocker women's basketball to take that next step. They were in the conversations and postseason play, WNIT, all of that under Keitha Adams, but you have an opportunity now to be able to even take it even further in the future, and it starts with getting local players to stay right here.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's as much about excitement as it is anything else, and that's what needs to happen. And this is an exciting potential, because what's going to happen is, imagine if Treasure Jobe is great, like as great as she's been at Emporia State. Everybody's going to talk about that because she's from Wichita, right? Like, she's from here, not just from the region, but straight up from the 316. And that's what you got to have to build that excitement and build that buzz. And I hope that she is, tremendously successful. They're just, it looks like it's going to be fun. I don't know how quickly, that can happen. I don't know how long it will take to rebuild and do those things. I honestly, I have no idea. But I think that, the early things, like everything, the hire made a ton of sense. And then the coaching staff, when you see Scales come back, makes a ton of sense. And then, a signing like this, it is getting a little buzz and a little excitement. So that's what you want to see out of those situations and things. All right, Tommy, let's hit now on a story that you brought up that I'm not aware of, but you can set it up and explain it here. There is a developing situation in the world of hockey, and it has to do with the Arizona Coyotes, and it has to do with their arena, and it has to do with their connection to Wichita, and maybe has even more to do with a connection to the region here. So walk us through this. What's happening?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of drama over the last, I would say couple of years with the Arizona Coyotes, and anybody that, follows the NHL or knows much about hockey at all has followed this drama with their venue, with their arena, and ultimately it's gone to a public vote in Tempe, Arizona for the money to build a new stadium for the Arizona Coyotes. That public vote, that referendum, was soundly defeated in Tempe, Arizona. And so now the NHL, the ownership of the Coyotes, they are exploring other options to potentially move that franchise to another market. And there are some names of cities that are, that are out there that have been floated. Salt Lake City is one of them. Houston is one of them. Kansas City is another one, and I know that there's a group of folks in the Kansas City market that are very, very active in hoping to lure the Arizona Coyotes to Kansas City with the T-Mobile Center already downtown in Power and Light. We know the way that market operates with sports, and it's a market where the fan base is very, very passionate. Typically, that there could be an option there. I don't know how realistic it is, but I do know that the mayor of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas, this morning tweeted about it. Tweeted to the NHL, saying, "Hey, let's have a conversation about what it might look like to bring the NHL to Kansas City." So I don't know how realistic it is, like I said before, but it's certainly something to monitor.
Kansas City, and Lucas is just the representative right now, but just in general, Kansas City needs another team. It has too good an arena, and the NBA seems unlikely, but that arena downtown needs to have a hockey or an NBA team, and maybe both, but just at the moment, one or the other, right? So there's zero chance that doesn't go well. Right? Like, if you put an NHL team in downtown Kansas City, it will be just like it's been in Vegas, just like it's been in Seattle. People will go nuts for it. It makes a ton of sense. And Salt Lake City probably does too. I mean, some of the cities, like Houston, to me makes the least sense. Houston, you're fighting a lot of battles if you're trying to go to Houston. man, get into Kansas City. And Salt Lake City would be a good one too, but get into Kansas City. That would be such a massive win for this area, right? Like to have that opportunity and that ability to have that there.
Yeah, well, on top of that, too, don't forget that the Coyotes played a preseason game here in Wichita last year,
Right.
and they're going to be playing another one this September. So there already is some familiarity with this region. I've heard a few people throw out the idea that they could relocate to Wichita. That's not going to happen. I'll tell you that right now. This city, is not big enough to support an NHL team. But Kansas City, I think, could certainly be feasible.
Yeah.
That could be something that, could work out really well. And you know what? I know that there's also a group of folks that would desperately love to have an NBA team in Kansas City. I don't know which one is more likely. I would imagine that since there is a team that looks like they could potentially be on the move in the NHL, that one may be more likely than an NBA team, because I'm not sure that there's an NBA franchise right now that's ready to move.
NHL seems more likely to me because NBA is going to almost certainly take, expansion. And I don't know if that's in the cards. And let me tell you right now that the NBA is going to want to get into Vegas before it gets into anywhere, just like everybody else, right? Vegas is the spot right now. So, I don't know. And Seattle, quite frankly, back to Seattle. I would say the NBA is unlikely. But I think the NHL makes a lot of sense. Look at the success of both soccer franchises seemingly there. Obviously, we know the Chiefs. The Royals are trying to get downtown. It would make sense. I mean, it really would. And, in the region, too, like you have St. Louis. There's not a ton. Like, you have a chance to draw from a really large pool. And I would think, Tommy, for the Thunder, something like that would be really good too, right? Because you're just generating more hockey fans, and more hockey fans is good for you guys and for everybody.
Yeah, the other thing too, to keep in mind with this is that you've got the T-Mobile Center already there. It's ready to go. You'd have to, I think, retrofit it to fit hockey. I don't exactly know how that works, but that arena is already there. So you don't have to try to build a new arena. It's right in the middle of Power and Light. It's ready to go. It doesn't host any sports right now. It's a concert venue, but you could obviously, it hosts like the Big 12 championship and things like that, but like not regularly, like having a team that calls it home. So you would probably have to do a little bit of work in that building, I would think, but it'd be significantly less than trying to build, a new arena. You wouldn't have to try to convince taxpayers to, give public dollars to build it. It's already there and ready to go. So in that sense, that should be a pretty easy putt.
I assume Salt Lake City would be in the same scenario because they have an NBA arena there. It's exciting to think about. I really, I'm on board with it. And I think these leagues are probably pretty aware of what Kansas City is becoming just as a city in general, which, the draft and the Chiefs' success should probably show the World Cup, right? Like, I think it's becoming a city that, absolutely deserves another pro sports franchise, and hockey would make a ton of sense. And I'm just telling you, people would go nuts for it. It's just like in Vegas and Seattle. I mean, I've seen these Kraken games because they're on late at night against the Stars. It's fun, man. Like it's exciting. The Vegas has been that way since inception, but Kansas City would make a ton of sense for those same reasons. 869-1240. We're going to do a little exercise on NFL wide receivers when we return. Devontae Adams in the news. He's, not really agreeing with management there in Vegas. It just makes me wonder, are these big contract wide receivers ever worth it? We'll explore as we continue on Sports Daily.
You gotta hear this.
Go ahead. I think I want to hear this.
Sports Daily is on KFH.
All right, welcome back in Sports Daily, everybody. Jacob Albrock, Tommy Castor with you here. And, you know, it's an interesting day in our world because we are locked into the NBA. Now, that is no other reason than we're college basketball centric here, but we are captivated by the Western Conference Finals going into it, and Game 1 did not disappoint as Denver holds off the Lakers. And, you know, if you missed our discussion on it in depth, you can go back and listen on the Odyssey app. We opened the show with it, but just a fascinating series that gave us a fascinating Game 1. And I hope, even though I don't think it's nearly as juicy and exciting storyline-wise with Boston and Miami, Jimmy Butler can make this thing very interesting if Miami's able to hang around. That game is tonight. Andrew appreciates the NBA coverage and says he's here for it. Well, Andrew, we'll do our best. We had so much fun guessing players on the Spurs roster. We should do that sometime, Tommy. Like maybe one day every week, we'll take the bad NBA teams and try to guess players on their rosters. Like Portland outside of Damian Lillard. You got to give me 3 players. Like we'll do this, and we won't cheat because we have no idea. Like, and fully will admit it. Like it's, we're at the top end of the NBA locked in, but the bottom end, these ain't those days anymore.
And I'm like begrudgingly becoming a fan of the playoffs. Like if you follow me on Twitter, by the way, for years I've talked about how much I hate the NBA, dislike it. I don't usually like the style of play. I don't like the drama, like all the stuff that, is that narrative around the NBA. But man, I mentioned it at the top of the show. This playoff series this season, I'm kind of starting to come off my stance a little bit. It's become more fun to watch, more fun to follow, more fun to cover. I don't want to go out on a limb yet and say I'm becoming an overall NBA fan, but these playoffs, it's made it a lot easier for me to lock in.
The time of year, the load management aspect of the new regular season makes it pretty impossible for me to lock in as a regular season. And because we just are so much more, involved in college basketball here. But I've always said the postseason, when everybody's going, for as best they can, full strength for full amount, God, it's hard to beat. It is such a high level of basketball, and it's so fun. And Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals is a perfect example of that. All right, Tommy, I read this morning Davante Adams is saying he's not on the same page with the front office in Vegas and what they're doing, and he'll battle through it and all these things. And I just think about what Vegas gave up to go get Davante Adams, which didn't make sense at the time. They were swinging big. They gave up a ton of draft capital to do it, and then they give him the big contract. Chiefs, similar situation with Tyreek Hill. I'm going to give you a list of the highest paid wide receivers in football. And I want you to tell me if you think this is worth it for these teams. Tyreek Hill's at the top, $30 million a year. Davante Adams, next on the list, $28 million a year. By the way, 29 years old, 31 years old. DeAndre Hopkins at 31 years old, $27 million a year. Cooper Kupp, 30 years old, $26 million a year, a little more than. A.J. Brown, he's the youngest on this top tier by quite a ways at $25 million. DK Metcalf, the other one, at $24 million is young. Steph Diggs is in there at 30. So that's your top tier. Then you get into some of the younger guys like Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are both up there at 20+ million. Amari Cooper, 20 million. And I always wonder this. And if you look at this list that I just named off, Cooper Kupp definitely helped the Rams win a Super Bowl, right? A.J. Brown was definitely a big reason the Eagles were in a Super Bowl. Steph Diggs has been a big part of the Bills. But is it worth it to spend this kind of money on wide receivers in the NFL? Because to me, with all the great receivers now that seemingly come out of every draft, it's almost getting to that point where reloading and retooling is the way to go. But how do you let Cooper Kupp walk? You can't really do it. But the Chiefs did it, right? The Chiefs did it with Tyreek Hill, and it didn't hurt them. That's the example, I think. I just don't know if it's worth it for these great wide receivers and the price they command.
Well, yeah, look at the Chiefs as a perfect example. Like I think they're in the bottom tier of total salaries for wide receivers in the NFL, and they won a Super Bowl without a star wide receiver that they paid a lot of money. They let Tyreek Hill go. They replaced him with a number of bodies in that room with Smith-Schuster and Valdez-Scantling and Sky Moore and others, and they won a championship without having a high-paid star wide receiver. So it can be done. I think one thing about Devontae Adams, as far as whether or not he's worth it and the money that he's being paid, the only counter to that I would say, where I would say yes, he is worth it, is that he has the most receiving yards in the NFL in the last 7 years. So there's a reason why he's making the money that he is, right?
I'm not saying that these players aren't great. I mean, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Cooper Kupp, they're all fantastic players. Like, they're all great.
Right.
And Devontae, and this is the interesting part to me. So Devontae Adams, when he's with Aaron Rodgers, certainly would feel like he's worth it, right? Tyreek Hill was great either way. DeAndre Hopkins is great with several quarterbacks. But, like, if you don't have a great quarterback, I don't think you can make these signings if you don't have a great quarterback. But then you get the counter to that, which is, can a great quarterback be great even without them and spend your money elsewhere? It is really interesting, and always has been to me, this dynamic of wide receivers. Because for a long time, it's no longer this way, but for a long time in the NFL, like, great wide receivers never seem to win Super Bowls. And so those days are gone, right? That's the league is so pass happy. You've got to have good receivers. I don't know. Like, I don't know, as you sit here and you're the Raiders and you go and you spend big to get Devontae Adams, who's this amazing player, but who do you have to throw to him, right? And does he fit what you need to do? Chris asks, are wide receivers becoming the new running backs when it comes to contracts, rookies, and cast-offs in lieu of expensive vets? I don't think so, because the league is so pass-happy, and their shelf lives, while not super long, are longer certainly than running backs. So no, I don't think it's to that point. In fact, I think they're getting drafted higher than they ever have been, because they are getting more expensive. And it is worth it to spend high draft capital on him, because good, young, cheap, inexpensive wide receivers have a tremendous value. Not as much as a quarterback, not as much probably as a pass rusher, but in today's NFL, they might be third on the list, Tommy, of, if you can get good young ones that are a little cheaper while you have them on those rookie deals, have a pretty high value in this league.
And isn't that's been the strategy for Kansas City ever since Tyreek Hill left? It's been, let's try to go get value as opposed to dropping a ton of money, on a wide receiver that is proven. And I think that a lot of it is developing talent, right? It's trying to get the most out of guys where you find the value in them. And then you've got some vets that come over that are, they're willing to play for a year and prove it and then go on somewhere else, like Juju Smith-Schuster. But, they're developing guys like Sky Moore, and they're developing Justin Ross. We'll see how he does. They've got Rashee Rice now that they drafted. Like, they would rather find Kadarius Toney is there. Never really turned out in New York, and they want to try to unlock him a little bit more in Kansas City. They would rather do that and develop talent and find value that way than go out and spend a lot of money on really highly paid wide receivers, and then be able to spread that money, that budget that they have, in their, the payroll and all of that, in other areas that really need the help. That they're not willing to drop a lot of money on wide receivers. Otherwise, if they were, they would still have Tyreek Hill.
It's and then you can't really afford both, right? If you have a great quarterback, you can't really afford a great quarterback and a great wide receiver. So it is a really interesting dynamic that's coming alive in the NFL, because we've never seen this many great receivers all at one time, which makes total sense because of the way the game has shifted, down to the youth levels and how the game has become pass happy. So I'm intrigued by it because I don't know what the best way is. The best way is to have Patrick Mahomes, right? And so you don't have to worry about it. That's the best way. But if you don't have Patrick Mahomes, what do? And the team that jumps and screams up to the forefront on this dynamic is Cincinnati, right? Because they're going to have some. I mean, they can't keep. I don't think they can't keep T. Higgins and Burrow and Jamar Chase. Like, I don't know how that's going to be possible. The Chargers have 2 high-paid wide receivers, but they haven't had to pay Herbert yet, and they're probably going to be looking to move on from one of those receivers soon, which is why they took Quentin Johnston. But I just don't know, because think about if Cincinnati does that, like, what do they do elsewhere? Like, what are they going to be able to do? What are they going to be able to do?
There's a reason why their offensive line has been bad, over the last couple of years, right? I mean, like, it's not like they've got a ton of money to pay him.
Because don't you think that, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, we know, right? Jamar Chase is going to reset the market. T. Higgins probably won't do that. But if he gets up around, let's say, I don't know, DK Metcalf kind of money, Terry McLaurin, that's probably reasonable. So let's say it's around 25. And I think Jamar Chase will reset. So let's just match it to Tyreek Hill's 30, right? So there's $55 million, which is what you also have to pay quarterbacks in the current market. So let's say Burrow is at 55 or 60. You're talking about $110 million of your payroll for 3 players. Like, that doesn't seem sustainable to me. I don't know how that can work. And so I don't know. And then at that point, like, okay, T. Higgins goes to the open market because I think they would choose Chase over Higgins. He goes to the open market. How do you justify paying that much money for a receiver on the open market? And we see teams do it, plus draft picks. They do it all the time. Steph Diggs, A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams. We thought it was going to happen with DeAndre Hopkins. Like, teams are doing it. So I don't know. It is, and it got brought up because Devontae Adams doesn't seem to be fitting. Devontae Adams, I mean, the Raiders aren't going to win a Super Bowl with Devontae Adams. He's one of the great receivers in the game. And it's just not, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to do anything for them. It makes you really scratch your head at why they would do that in the first place. Now, they were pretty bullish on their prospects last year, but it certainly didn't work out. Now it's not going to. So what are they going to do? They're just going to eat that money every year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is an argument that the Raiders tried to make by saying, hey, if we can get the NFL leading receiver from the last 6 years into our locker room, he can help us get over the hump, make it to the playoffs and move, down the line. The issue with that was that they didn't have a quarterback to throw the ball to him. Derek Carr, it wasn't working. And then he, of course, was done, midway or little past midway through the season. Now what are you going to have? You got Jimmy Garoppolo. You feel comfortable with Jimmy Garoppolo throwing Devontae Adams the football and saying that's a playoff team? I don't think so. Like, I really don't. And so while I don't understand the amount of money that was given to Devontae Adams, I understand the appeal of having a Devontae Adams-like receiver in your locker room, but it can't just be Devontae Adams. Like, you have to have the other pieces around to complement him, and they don't. And so that's why it didn't make any sense to me. Not the fact that he's a great receiver. He's the best in the NFL, but you don't have anybody else around him to be able to take care of him and boost him up. I mean, it's a huge drop off. It was a huge drop off a year ago going from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr. And I would argue it's an even bigger drop off now going to Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, I think so. Here's the other part of it. Is there any conspiracy theory? Is there any conspiracy theory in your head that exists that Devontae Adams is doing what he can to get out of Vegas to maybe end up with the Jets and Aaron Rodgers?
Absolutely.
I wonder if could they afford
100%.
that?
Yeah.
Could they afford that?
I don't think it's going to happen, but sure. I mean, I think Adams can be vocal and, try to get out of town and go reunite with Rodgers. I don't think he will. I don't think the Jets will do that. But man, that certainly could be a strategy.
I don't know if the Jets can afford that, but I think they would absolutely do that. If you're the Jets, let's just invent a scenario here. And I don't know that teams can't eat money like that in the NFL, can they? They can't absorb payroll like they can, say, in Major League Baseball. Can they? I don't know if they can.
I don't know.
But let's say there could be a way. Let's say the Jets do that and then restructure Adams' contract to push that money down the road or something. what would you be willing to give up if you were the Jets, if you could get Davante Adams on that roster right now? A lot, right?
Yeah.
I'd give up another first because you've already gone all in. Like, you've gone all in here. If the Raiders said, we're going to need a first and a second, we got to get our draft picks back that we traded for them, and you're the Jets. And it just totally hamstrings your franchise 3, 4, 5 years from now. Do you go do that right now? You kind of have to, don't you?
I mean, if the Jets do that, if that works out, and they don't win a championship and they've pushed all their chips into the center of the table and you're going all in for it and they don't make it, I don't know if there would be a more colossal disappointment than the New York Jets if that were to happen.
Tommy, you've offended Max, the Patriots diehard, with your Jimmy Garoppolo take. Max, what's going on here? I'll give you a chance to step up and defend your boy, Jimmy G. But Max sent me a text. I'll tell you what he said. He said, Jimmy G isn't bad. He's more than serviceable. His problem is he's very delicate and is never in a hurry to return after injury. Well, yeah. I mean, he's very fragile. Delicate's maybe a little harsh, Max.
No, he's
fragile.
delicate.
He gets hurt all the time.
He's
delicate.
He's too good looking to get hurt. That's what he thinks. But he's not bad. He played that one game when Brady was suspended against Arizona.
He's not bad, or he's not bad looking?
I guess either one if you're. But he played that one game versus Arizona. Yeah, wifey loves him. Oh, she melts when she sees Jimmy G. But he had that good game against Arizona when Brady was suspended. And then he had a good quarter against Miami. Got hurt. And was too delicate to come back for game 4. And the same thing last year in the Super Bowl. He could have played.
He's hurt all the time.
Yeah, he was sitting on the bench laughing. He should have been playing.
Has there ever been a better looking quarterback room than the Patriots had with Brady and Jimmy G? Like that's interesting. Max, I'm giving Max a little bit of a hard time here. Jimmy G's an interesting player. He is, I don't know what he is. Except hurt all the time. Is he a good quarterback? I don't know. I mean, he led the Niners to a Super Bowl, and I don't know. I don't. That's not going to work. I don't see him as a good fit with Davante Adams, though. The only thing about Jimmy G being in Vegas that's interesting is the reuniting with Josh McDaniels, and I do think Jimmy G's a very smart football player, and so maybe he is capable of getting something out of Adams. But Adams is clearly not wanting to be there, and I don't know. Chris on our video stream says the Jets only have $6 million in space, so they'd have to. I don't know. They could probably restructure. Honestly, they could probably restructure somehow and get get that money cleared up if they really, really wanted to. But I don't know if they really, really want to. I think that man, would they make that trade? I haven't seen that, by the way. That's just us thinking here. That maybe the Jets would be interested. But if it was ever a possibility and you're the Jets, why wouldn't you just push all your chips into the middle of the table at that point? Max, it's this story. Buddy just sent me this. I didn't see this. The Oscar Myer company is renaming, apparently, the Weiner Mobile to the Frank Mobile. They're not calling the drivers hot doggers anymore, but Frankfurters. And the, what used to be the Wiener whistle will now be the Frank whistle. This bugs me. Now they're saying it's, to pay homage to the Frank and blah, blah, blah. What are we doing here, Max? Like, what are we doing here? We don't need to mess with the Wiener Mobile.
No, that's weird. I saw that driving down Kellogg.
Yeah.
A few weeks or a month ago.
Is this like a politically correct thing?
It has to be.
Like I draw the line. That's unacceptable. Like, are we really going to starve kids one of their few ways to sneak in a borderline inappropriate word into regular conversation when we talk about hot dog wieners? Like, when you're a kid, like, that's a great thing. You get to use that word you're probably not supposed to say, but you get to because that's what we call hot dogs, and you've got the Wiener Mobile and all this stuff. Like, What are we doing here, Max? I don't like this one bit.
Have
The
they-
Frank Mobile?
Have they
What is
banned the
that?
Oscar Myer Wiener song too?
Exactly. Like, what are we doing? It's a hot dog wiener. It's the Wiener Mobile. Like, they made a whole thing about it. And if you're a company, I'm sorry, Oscar Myer. Like, if you think people are getting excited and caring about the Frank Mobile, the only reason people have ever cared about the Wiener Mobile is because it's the Wiener Mobile. And it drives down the road and it's hilarious. It's far less hilarious if it's the Frank Mobile. Like, come on. What is that?
Look, it's the Frank Mobile.
No. Not doing anything for me. The Frank Mobile. The Frankfurter instead of the hot dogger.
See if you can sing
My
along
God.
with this, Jacob.
Oh, I'd love to be an Oscar Mayer.
I want to be an Oscar Myer Frank or Frankfurt. Like, what is it? I don't even. And that song, by the way, Max is older than me. Like,
That's
that
true.
wasn't even. Like, it's not even. For me, though, like, that is an iconic, like, unbelievable marketing gimmick and tool that Oscar Myer has had for its hot dogs. And I can't tell you if Oscar Myer has good hot dogs. I have no idea. But you want to talk about brand recognition? Man, the Wiener Mobile is iconic. And it is not going to be if it's called the Frank Mobile. It's just not. That's just bad. It's a bad idea, a bad decision. I don't understand. Maybe it's one of those things like the M&M commercial where they're just messing with us. They just want to get everybody talking about it and riled up, because I'm riled up. I don't like this at all.
Be like New
Maybe
Coke.
that's what it is.
Remember New Coke?
Yeah. Kind of like why? Like why would
Yeah.
you mess with that? Like what's the point here? Don't call it New Coke. Call it, now they do it. They obviously don't do that anymore. They have Diet and they just call it
Classic.
Zero or all the different flavors and stuff. But new, like, yeah, that almost feels like an attack on Coke, which bothered people. This feels like an attack on calling a hot dog wiener a hot dog wiener and having to call it a hot dog Frank. Like, yeah, let me get one of those Franks. No, nobody says that, and we're taking away a really fun part of being a kid, and that's getting the excuse to say wiener when you're talking about a hot dog and a car in what used to be, I guess, a car. I don't know when this change is happening. Oscar Myer says it pays homage to the brand's 100% beef franks as it debuts a tasty new recipe that's more flavorful than ever.
Sounds like New Coke.
It sounds like trying to distance yourself from calling it the Wiener Mobile to me. That's what it sounds like, and I think that's an absolutely horrible idea. So,
Believe it or not,
I don't know.
Jacob, I have this from the early 70s, this radio thing. It was Earth News Radio. And there was a guy that actually was the only one that could play the Oscar Mayer Wiener whistle. He knew the 3 notes or something on it. And he used to play. It's in this thing I have, Earth News Radio from like 72 or 3.
what? Like, why? Like, we don't get to say Wiener whistle anymore? We have to say Frank whistle? Nobody's doing that. It's a bad idea. Frank, you can get a hot dog, Frank. Let me get one of those Franks. No, come on. Kids are going to, whatever. My kids are still calling it the Wiener Mobile. I'm calling it the Wiener Mobile. Like, we're not doing this. I'm not. You can tell me what you want me to call it all you want, Oscar Myer. You're not changing my mind. 869-1240. We'll come back. We'll tell you what's on tap as we wrap up Sports Daily on a Wednesday.